Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Din and Daf. This week, we are going to talk about the question of, do we punish people preemptively? Why are we talking about that question? We're talking about that question because we actually see three instances of it in three different Mishnayot in the 8th perek of Sanhedrin. One is the instance of the Ben Sorer Umoreh, who is Nidon al Shem Sofo, not punished because of what they've done so far, but punished for what they will do. Another is the example of the Baba Machteret, someone who is Nidon al Shem Sofo, who is punished, meaning is open to the possibility of retaliation on the part of the homeowner, not because of what's been done. After all, we're just looking at geza, we're just looking at burglary, which is not a capital offense in Judaism, but can still be put to death with impunity by the homeowner because of what we assume the Baba Machteret will do, namely that when the homeowner objects to the theft, the Baba Machteret will be willing to kill them, and thus, Habal Hargacha Hashkem Hargo. One who's going to come kill you, you should get up and kill them first. And the third example is the example of מצילין אותן בנפשן, the people who are on their way to doing something bad, and by the way, even a capital offense, but they haven't done it yet, and you can stop them by killing them first. The most famous example, really made famous by the Rabin assassination, is the example of a rodef, someone who is going to kill other people. Now, these three examples, Nidon al Shem Sofo, two of them, and מצילין אותן בנפשן, one of them, they actually are a very dangerous precedent for a legal system. The idea that you could kill people before they've done what's bad, assuming that they will not be able to turn back, they will not do tshuva, or that they will definitely go through with what they're saying, that is a major innovation in these three cases. And in fact, you even see, especially with the example of מצילין אותן בנפשן, you even see an attempt to limit to whom this may refer. So what I want to think about with you today is, how were these concepts used throughout Jewish history in terms of the way that we do psak? Do we actually allow people to be punished before they've done what is actually the punishable offense that we are worried about, given how, I think, possibly dangerous that could be for a legal system and for a society? So what I want to do first is I want to actually look at this concept of Nidon al Shem Sofo, because the way that it comes up in the Ben Sorer Umoreh case, there's a whole conversation after it that is significant for us to look at. So let me just share my screen. Okay. So the Mishnah that is about the Ben Sorer Umoreh, who is Nidon al Shem Sofo, notice that it continues to try to explain its logic. Yamut zakai v'al yamut chayav. Better that the person dies while they're still innocent, at least to a degree, than after they've become guilty. Shemitatan shel rishaim hana'a lahen v'hana'a. The deaths of those who are evil is good for them and good for the world. Letzadikim, but for those who are righteous, ra lahen v'ra le'olam, that they're bad for them and bad for the world. Now, this is very intense what the Mishnah is saying, and I want to understand what it means. So where I turn to try to understand what this is actually talking about is I turn to Mishnat Eretz Yisrael. Mishnat Eretz Yisrael is something that you can find on Sefaria. It's incredible. It is a modern parish by the Safrai siblings. I like to call it Chana Safrai and her siblings, or maybe it's her brother and her father, the three of them together. And it's really a remarkable resource that I would suggest that everybody use. So Mishnat Eretz Yisrael tries to suggest maybe 4 ways of reading this Nidon al Shem Sofo, because better to die zakai and not to die chayav, and mitatan shel rishaim is good and mitatan shel tzadikim is bad. So let's take a look at what they have to say. Okay, here are the 4 explanations that they offer. Ritzono ha'amiti shel haben shema'adif lamut zakai lomar al chet katan. That maybe what it means is, right, Tov She'emut Zakai is the child themselves would rather, ultimately, maybe in their heart of hearts, to die innocent than to die guilty of doing much worse than these small chataim of eating a certain amount of meat and drinking a certain amount of wine, right? Another explanation, which speaks more to the idea of mitatan shel tzadikim is good for the world, shel rishaim is good for the world. tova le'olam sheyimneu mimenu hanezakim. Maybe what we're talking about is that it's better for the world, not that this person would think of it better for themselves, but it's better for the world that you're keeping the bad things that they're going to do from the world. Third, tovato ha'amitit shel kol rasha sheba'etzem sho'ef lamut kedei lechaper al chata'av. Really, we look into the souls of anybody who's really wicked, and ultimately they really want to die in order to get kapara for themselves, even if parenthetically they say that they want to live. Or maybe what we're looking at is the parents are supposed to forgive the child before they put the child to death, right? Now, all of these, you look at all of these and you're sort of like, whoa, like no matter which one of these you take, it doesn't really jive with our sensibilities. So we have to add on to this that part of what's going on here is not just the question of, are they nidon al shem sofo, and that's good for the world or bad for the world and what it's going to keep from us, but actually that we're looking at Chazal essentially see the psukim in the Torah, and they're trying to understand, why would you allow this to happen? Why would a ben sorer umoreh actually be able to be put to death? And I think they're trying to come up with some logic, the same way they look at the Baba Machteret and they say, well, what might be the logic? But even within the logic, within that logic, we also recognize that there's a lot that's done among Chazal to be able to limit the possibility, even down to zero, of actually preemptively punishing this child for something they haven't done yet, right? So some of the examples that people talk about are the examples where Chazal will read the fact that it talks about the mother and the father, that the mother and the father have to look alike and they have to be the same height in order to put the child to death. But there's actually much more to it. They also increase the involvement of Beit Din in this whole process. They also add the requirement of warning into this whole process, which is not a requirement that is muvan me'elav from the psukim themselves. Now, one thing I also want to say is, even if you look at the Torah in an ancient Near Eastern context, the Torah itself is already doing something that has more justice than the ancient Near East, because in the ancient Near East, parents could put their child to death in their backyard and nobody would know about it. The Torah, at the very least, has actually added the component of the public, added the component of the requirement for the kahal and for the Beit Din in some ways, or whatever the Beit Din is considered, to play some sort of role. So in some ways, what Chazal are doing is they're just taking it the next step further to say, okay, wait a second. It's not just that we don't want them to just be able to put a child to death willy-nilly. It's also that we need to be able to create guardrails so that even using Beit Din, even using the kahal, this will not happen. And I think it's really quite clear when you look at the Gemaras, all of the layers that Chazal add on until you finally get to the concept that, well, actually, there's never been a ben sorer umoreh, right? Despite the fact that in the Gemara, there is someone who says there has been a ben sorer and I've seen him. Actually, in the Tannaitic literature, what you find is there hasn't been a ben sorer umoreh. So I think even from the beginning, this concept of nidon al shem sofo is a concept that is complicated for Chazal. So I want to know, okay, but once you have this precedent in the Gemara and in the Mishnah of Nidon al Shem Sofo and מצילין, אותן, bnefshan, how does this actually come up as poskim are looking at different examples in other situations, not a ben sorer umoreh, not about Machteret? How do they actually think about these things? So I want to look at three cases. One is a modern case that's actually picking up from something earlier in the Middle Ages. Another is a case that is much more in the realm of it's Middle Ages, but it's in the realm of Jewish self-preservation. And the third is I actually want to talk about rodef. So let's dig in. Let's start with a case that is a modern case, but it actually can find its roots in the Middle Ages. So there actually was a modern case in Israel in 2015 of a husband who was cheating on his wife and refused to give her a get. And the conversation was, can he be forced to give a get? And this came in front of a Beit Din, I believe, in Tel Aviv. And I gave you the link to it so that you can see it. And what happens is this Psak Din quotes a very famous passage in the Aguda, who's often quoted La Halakha in Shulchan Aruch, where he talks about the following, okay? Amar Rava says, Noseh Adam Kama Nashim V'hu De'efshar B'sibukayu. A man is allowed to marry more than one woman as long as he can actually support all of those women. And on this, the Aguda says, Pam achad ba'maseh liyadi. One time a situation came to me. Leah to'enet al Reuven shehu ezonot v'hu kofer. Leah says that her husband is cheating on her essentially, and that he also has become an apostate. Oh, excuse me, v'hu kofer, he disagrees, sorry. Upasakti, not v'hu kofer, but v'hu kofer, meaning he denies that he's done it, excuse me. Upasakti she'im tavi edim shehu kain. And I ruled that if she can bring witnesses that this is the truth, that he actually was cheating on her, yotzi v'itin, right? He has to divorce her because that's what she wants, and he has to give her ketubah payment. And this is how he explains it. Ibait ema kra, it might be because of a pasuk. Ibait ema gemara, maybe it's because of, I would say a tradition. Ibait ema svara, maybe we would say it's because of logic. So kra, what's the pasuk? Dichtiv im tikach nashim al benotai. If you take other women above my daughters, then you're in trouble, right? This is, Lavan talking to Yaakov, right? So use that pasuk to say, hey, wait a second, he's not supposed to be sleeping with other women when he's married his woman. Ibait ema gemara, maybe it's actually more of like a traditional law to amrin and halakha, because we say here, behu de'efshar b'sipukayhu. It's only if you can provide for all of these women who you are going to be with. U'benidon zeh k'tiv, and regarding this is written in Mishlei, v'ro'ez zonot yovad hom, right? Someone who sleeps around essentially is going to lose their money. Wow, wait, what? Right? It sounds like the assumption is that this man is going to be with multiple women and he's going to end up paying for things of theirs and he's not going to be able to support his wife. Now, I don't think the pasuk in Mishlei is actually saying that, but the pasuk in Mishlei is being used to say that. I want to point out, using that logic, what we're basically saying is, why is that we're going to force this man to divorce his wife? Because he is, in the end, not going to have enough money to divorce her. I might say it's Nidon al Shem Sofo. Even though right now he has enough money to support her, he will not in the future have enough money to support her. And then V'i'baydei masfara, another explanation is just based on logic. Digara mikol hanu de perek hamadir. He's worse than all of those things where we say certain mumim, you force the man to divorce the woman because she says, I can't stand this person. Well, the fact that he is sleeping with other women, that is even worse than those. But I want to zero in on the fact that one of the explanations that he gives is essentially this situation in Nidon al Shem Sofo. The situation is, yes, right now he can support her, but in the future, he's not going to be able to support her. And therefore, right now already, we make him divorce her, right? Now, obviously, it's true that the Aguda is looking for ways to make this divorce happen because that's what the woman wants and he's cheating on her, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think it's an interesting use of Nidon al Shem Sofo. And I have to say that the Chacham Tzvi, who has become very famous in certain circles because of his psak about people from outside Eretz Yisrael visiting Israel for Chagim and whether they have to keep 1 day of Yantif or 2 days of Yantif, the Chacham Tzvi in the 17th century, he actually notices, he's writing a tshuva about a situation where a man actually did cheat on his wife, also in a matter of biblical adultery, meaning with another married woman. And ultimately he did tshuva and he's come back to the fold, et cetera, et cetera. And his current wife still wants to divorce him. Can a divorce be forced? The Chacham Tzvi in that situation says no, because he's done tshuva, so we can't force it. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't say he should, but we can't force it. But it's interesting that the Chacham Tzvi says, I know that the Aguda says that we're worried if somebody who's sleeping with other people will not eventually have money. But still, I think in this situation, you're not going to be able to force it. And this is what he says. And even though I'm not really comfortable with the Aguda's position, because the Aguda's position is essentially we are judging him already, forcing him to divorce because of the possibility of later him not having enough money. Because the chiddush with the situation of the Ben Sorer Moreh, that's an innovation, and you're not supposed to learn from something that's innovative like that to other situations. He says, Mikol Makom, at any rate, afilu divrei ha'aguda, ein hadvarim amurim el b'mochzak l'kach. He says, even the Aguda would agree in my case, where the guy has done tshuva and he's not doing this anymore, that we wouldn't say, well, now Nidon al Shem Sofo because he won't have money. Well, because he stopped and he's finished. But I do think this is an interesting example of can you use the concept of Nidon al Shem Sofo essentially to free a woman from a bad marriage, right? That feels very different than using Nidon al Shem Sofo to kill a Ben Sorer Moreh, right? So I bring this up as an example because I think it's fascinating to suggest that once you have a concept like Nidon al Shem Sofo, you have a tool in your arsenal that you may or may not want to use in other moral situations. And here you have kind of somewhat of a tension between the Chacham Tzvi, who's not super comfortable with its use, and the Aguda, who, by the way, is Shulchan Aruch Paskins like him, that actually let's use this, even though he doesn't use the language of Nidon al Shem Sofo, but essentially saying, because we're ro'eh tanolad, because we see what's going to emerge from this, namely he's not going to have enough money to support his wife, you can force him to divorce right now. So that's our first example of Nidon al Shem Sofo. The second example I want to look at, and by the way, I should just say, I quoted a Shulchan Aruch for you, that some people use to say, no, actually, this isn't a case of Nidon al Shem Sofo. This is a little bit more like a different precedent that we have in Halakha, which is I gave you a loan, and I saw that what you're doing with your money and your assets in general is you're kind of squandering them. Maybe you're going out gambling. Maybe you're trying to squander them on purpose so you won't have to pay me back. And I don't have to wait till the time that the loan is due to bring you to Beit Din and say, I want to collect my money because I see what's going to happen. You are going to get rid of the money. And when it comes time for me to collect, there will be nothing there. So some people want to use that as their precedent instead of using Nidon al Shem Sofo because A, it's Ben Sorer Moreh, like it's a chiddush, and B, Nidon al Shem Sofo is really complicated. It's a really tricky tool to put into a legal system, right? The second example I want to look at is an example of Jewish self-preservation and actually just general self-preservation, where this issue of Nidon al Shem Sofo also comes up in a kind of fascinating way. The Trumat Adeshen, 15th century Austria, has the following question. Chavurat Yisrael darim be'ir achat. Jews are living in a city. Ve'yihile yamim yatsa tagar v'chirum al ha'ir. V'kol ha'ir yireim b'doagim penti laked ha'ir v'chazka or chazaka over ukva. So the problem is the city is now in danger of being overrun, okay, taken over, conquered. Umefakchim livnot ulachzik b'tkei ha'ir b'chafirot u'vinyanim. And what's happening is the whole city, not just the Jewish section of the city, but the whole city is now working on its fortifications, right? In order to protect itself. And they have people guarding day and night, lishmor, right? And they've asked the Jews to participate in strengthening some of the fortifications, and right? And they should also have some guards that they're offering to help guard the city, based on, their population. And there is an argument about this between the members of the Jewish community who are less financially well off, who are poor. They want they want payments for these fortifications instead of saying, okay, everybody's going to pay in $50. They want it to be based on your income. So the people who are wealthier will have to pay more, and the people who are poorer will have to pay less. But va'ashirim, the people who are more well off, they don't want that. They want it to be collected based on heads, right? Each head pays a certain amount, right? Some people think it should be based on households, not necessarily on individuals, but on households. But so what should we do? Should we actually ask people to pay for these fortifications lay out money based on their economic position? Or do you say based on head per head? Because after all, we're protecting everybody, right? So this is what the Truma Radeshin says. First of all, he says, I don't know all the details, and it's important for me to understand all the details, but nonetheless, what I want to do is I want to be able to explain at least what the Gemara says about things like this. So I'm going to go to the second paragraph. He says, Uvatchila ava'er din haTalmud upiskei hageonim. He says, I'm going to explain what the Gemara says and what the Gaonim say, asher yadati matzati, those things I know, ve'achar kach chalek b'davar l'fi ha'inyan. And afterwards, we'll deal with the issue at hand in concrete terms. We have a Mishnah. We remember learning this, many of you. You can force people to build the sort of the protective elements of the chatzir, right? The door, the shar, etc. Rashbag Omer, lo kol hachatzirot tzrichin lebeit shar. Rashbag says, well, you don't need necessarily all of those elements, right? And we also see kofino to live note le'ir chomaz latayim uvriach. We also force people who live in an area to pay for the things that protect the city itself, not just their chatzer. Rashbag omer lo kol ha'arot ru'iyot l'choma. Rashbag says, not every city needs a wall. V'ka'amar ala b'gemara, by minei Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yochanan, and the Gemara says about this, Rabbi Elazar asks Rabbi Yochanan, by the way, when you're actually asking people to build these, I guess fortifications might be the right word for it, right? Build these protective fences, etc., or doors. Kishehin govin, when they collect money to do this from the inhabitants, do they base it on the amount of money that people have? So people who have more will give more, people who have less will give less, or do they base it on just the number of people per head? This is what you pay. And what does Rabbi Yochanan say to him? Amar le, lefi shevach mamon hein govin. We do it based on the income. And not only that, he says, Elazar bini, my son Elazar, kva ba masmeirot. I want you to really nail this down, meaning this concept should be unshakable, right? And this is really fascinating because then we find explanations for why is it that Rabbi Yochanan says it has to be based on how much people make rather than, a per head kind of requirement. Right? The Rush explains there, the whole mill to the late base fashod, anything that doesn't have mortal danger for people, lo azlinan elabatar mamon. Then when we're talking about protection, we go by how much money people have rather than by head. We also see this in Bava Kama. If you have a caravan that was going in the wilderness, and a group of bandits come to burglarize it, if they want to try to pay them off, what you do is the people who have more pay more, the people who have less pay less, right? And likewise, with any situation where the nations of the world will put persecutions on the Jewish people, even if they punish them with, or they torture them with terrible pains, and they keep food and drink from them. Govin hakol lafi mamon. You collect, if you want to try to pay them off, you collect based on how much money different members of the Jewish community has. Why? Ikar kavanatam ala mamon. Because what they're really looking for is they're looking for money, right? These people who are trying to burglarize the caravan, their goal is not to kill people. Their goal is to collect money. But then the Baalei Hatos would say, wait, what are you talking about? We've seen cases where somebody comes ostensibly to get money, and we think that they're actually going to create sakana nefashot. That's the whole Baba Machteret. That's exactly Nidon al Shem Sofo. V'Tosfot makshim sham mehad amrinan beperek ben sorer more. Tosfot asked the question based on perek ben sorer more, right? Our perek. Baba Machteret Nidon al Shem Sofo. Baba Machteret ostensibly comes for money. We judge them as though they're coming for nefashot. And Rava explains the reason there, Mishum d'chazaka de'ein adam me'amid etzmo al mamano v'chulei, because a person's not going to stand back while someone burglarizes them, and then they're going to confront them, and then about Mukhtar's going to kill them, etc. Right? Ad mikol makom ein mechashibin bo el lefi mamon. Nonetheless, despite the fact that Baba Mukhtar, you might have thought, would be a precedent for us to say, even if somebody looks like they're coming for money, if eventually it could be nifashot, nidon al shem sofo, and we're going to say we're going to think about it as though it's nifashot, which in this case would mean people have to give money not based on how much money they have, because this isn't just about mammon, but actually per head people should pay in order to bribe them. He says, no, kevan da'agaya spirit so no, eno baal nifashot, because that group of bandits is not coming to kill. That's not their plan. Because if they don't stand up to them, they're not going to hurt them. Right? Therefore, we don't consider it sakana nefashot. And this is a really interesting example, because here you have a situation where, do we say nidon al shem sofo? They look like they're coming for money, but ultimately they might be creating sakana nefashot, and therefore we judge it as a sakana nefashot case, which would have implications as to if we're trying to pay them ransom, what do you pay per head rather than based on how much money people have, or do we say they're coming ali skemamon? And then he gets back to the situation where this city might actually be taken over. And he says, well, certainly in this situation, it is definitely possible that there could be some killing as part of taking over the city. But really what they're trying to do is they're really trying to get money. And he says it in such an interesting way. He says, lo daininan al shem sofo, ella kitchilata, right? We don't think about what the sof might be. We think about what the beginning might be. She'im ba'in aliskei mamon, ein mechashvin rak lefi shevach mamon. If we see that they're coming aliskei mamon, then we're just going to treat this as a mamon case, and it's going to be based on how much money people say, right? Mishum dehagayis uvnei hacharkom im lo yamdu kenegdam lo yaziku ligufam. Right? Because both in the case of the city that they're going to overrun and in the case of the caravan that's being overrun, if nobody fights back, then they won't kill anybody. So here's another example where possibly the concept of nidon al shem sofo would be able to be used. And in the end, they say, nah, we're not going to use nidon al shem sofo here, right? It's really kind of fascinating, because I might have said, well, just like the Baba Mukhtar, it comes for money, but bad things can happen from it. Same thing with, a group of bandits against a shayara, or same thing with people who are overrunning a city, but they decide not to use it. Now, again, is this a situation where we're trying to narrow the use of nidon al shem sofo? Is this a situation where we're trying to preserve the aniyim, that they shouldn't have to pay so much? It's a fair question, but suffice it to say, it's another example. I kind of knew this was going to happen. We're going to have to save the conversation about rodef for next week. The conversation about rodef is very, very deep. We're going to talk about the Rabin case. We're going to talk about a case in the Middle Ages, but hopefully this has already given us a window into how some of these concepts, like nidon al shem sofo, have been used and have ended up in the conversation, the halachic conversation over time. Thanks, everybody.